Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Hi, my name's June. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. Tom has no idea how much growth it is for me to say yes. I usually say no, it wouldn't bother me at all, and then somewhere in the middle of the meeting I begin strangling people near me or something like that. I remember hearing Don Gates share about that one, Don G. share about that sort of thing one time where he was playing chess and this guy was standing behind him and he kept popping his gum. And he just kept popping it, and finally in the middle of the game, Don just stood up and punched the guy out. And Don's partner said to him, he said, "Why did you do that? You know, you don't even know that guy." And he said, "Well," he said, "his gum chewing was driving me crazy, and I just couldn't stand it anymore." And his partner said, "Well, why didn't you just ask him to stop chewing gum?" He said, "I didn't want to hurt his feelings." And that's kind of the way I've always handled situations in life. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love what this program has done with my life. It's given me a life I never would have wanted, and it's made me a person I never would have wanted to be, and that's always been sort of interesting. And most of all, what's interesting about it is that I'm happier being this person than I never wanted to be than I ever was being the person I wanted so badly to be. I'm not an expert on alcoholism. I'm not an expert on Alcoholics Anonymous or anything really that I can think of. I'm not an authority on Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything I say really up here is just my opinion, you know, and I strongly advise any and all of you to go to lots and lots of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and hear lots and lots of opinions. And then get the book so you can find out what the program is really about, too, you know. It's nice to be here. I came here with some very close friends, and I've seen some other very close friends since I've been here. And I like this town. There's been a lot of things that have happened in my life and in my sobriety, and that's usually what I'm referring to when I speak of my life, because I didn't really do much living before I got here, and that have been real special and very important and significant in my life. And there's some people here that have been sober for a long time that have helped me a lot of times when I was here hitting meetings and things. I don't, you know, it never seems to make a whole lot of sense for me to do a lot of talking about what's going on in my life or has been recently unless I tell you a little bit about what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like today. I'm one of those people who believes I was born an alcoholic, and I don't want to get in any philosophical discussions with anyone. I'll just tell you that that's what I believe. And I believe that because there was something wrong with me before I ever started to drink, before I ever started to do anything, really. And the obsession for me, my first obsession was with suicide. It began at the age of 5 years old. I began to cut my hands and fingers and wrists with razor blades. At that time, I began to take overdoses of baby aspirin, which was all I knew about at the time. And this obsession that I had to kill myself was one that never went away. It was with me every day before I came into this program and for a long time even after I got here. I honestly don't believe that there was a day that went by before I came to this program that I didn't try and take my own life, put myself in a position where someone else would take my life, or pray to a God that I was slowly losing faith in to please let me die. It was my number one answer. And obviously I wasn't very successful at suicide. Because of that, I'm one of those people that is very grateful that I found alcohol and drugs when I did. Because I think it made it okay for me to make it out there until I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I started to use drugs on a regular basis when I was 7 years old. I began to drink regularly by the time I was 8. And by the time I was 9, I'd found a combination that I never altered in any way. That was alcohol and barbiturates or sleeping pills or downers, reds, yellows, whatever you might know them as. I never altered the combination because it got me exactly where I wanted to go. I was never a party girl. I've never been a social drinker. I don't have any cute, funny stories to tell you about the things that I did when I was out there drinking. Because if you took those kind of pills and mixed them with alcohol, you didn't do much either. And basically all I did is I did a lot of overdosing, I did a lot of throwing up, and that's pretty much the way that it was for me out there. But I honestly believe that were it not for those chemicals and alcohol, had I not found them, I really would have had to have been locked up in some kind of an institution. Because it just hurt too much out there all the time. I don't know exactly why that was. I've been to psychiatrists, I've been to psychologists in my life. I'm sort of like my friend Patty. I've always felt about those people that they should have to work for their money, so I never told them anything. And I would sit there for whatever the required period of time was, and I wouldn't answer one question. I wouldn't say one word. I would just look at them, you know, and I didn't want those people knowing anything about me, so I never really got a diagnosis that I can share with you of what was wrong with me. But even I knew that, you know, most people that were my age were not going home and trying to kill themselves in the same ways that I was and on the same basis that I was. But it was something that I could not get over those feelings, except for when I had enough chemicals in me and basically I was overdosed or passed out. That was the only time that I wasn't thinking of a way to kill myself or thinking of how much longer I could hang on before I could check out. I think in looking back, having been sober for a while, I can see some of the ways that I saw the world, and I'll try and explain them to you. They may not mean anything to you, but they've meant something to me. They've been some of the old ideas that I've had to work on. When I was a little kid growing up, I looked around, and the way that I saw the world, the people that I saw, I don't remember ever seeing a man show any emotion with the exception of anger and rage. I took that to mean that that's all men ever felt. That the most you could do is if a guy cared about you, you might be able to get him to punch you in the face once in a while. But outside of that, I really did not believe you could get any kind of an emotional reaction from a man. You know, I just didn't think that you could make them cry or make them hurt or anything like that. And although the women in my life reacted with a lot of violence and rage, I knew that things hurt them. I knew that they felt things. I knew that I could make them cry if they cared about me. And I looked at those two different groups of people and I decided immediately which one I wanted to be like. And I spent my life trying to be what I thought a man was. And to me, a man was someone who cared about no one, who felt absolutely nothing, and if they did, never let anyone know it. And, you know, interestingly enough, I was the kind of person that was completely incapable of living up to that standard that I was setting for myself, of trying to be that kind of person that felt absolutely nothing. In fact, if I wanted to think about it real hard, which fortunately I don't have to do too much anymore, I could tell you about being in grammar school and the first time that I went to school, and I could tell you what the kids teased me about and who they were and what they were wearing and each of the names that they called me and how much it hurt inside, because I remember that. And I remember being there and standing there in that schoolyard and having these people tease me about having curly red hair and being tall and being skinny and all these things that, you know, everybody gets teased about if those things happen to fit. And remembering how much it hurt and knowing at that particular point in time when I felt that pain inside and I felt myself wanting to cry that I was the thing that I hated the most in the world, that I was weak. And throughout my life, there's never been anything that I could tolerate less than anyone, most of all myself, than those things which I decided were weak. And to me, showing any emotion, with the exception of anger and rage, by anyone, meant only one thing. It meant that you were weak. And so I found out at a very early age that I was that thing that I hated the most. Interestingly enough, I'm not one of those people that, through my drinking and my using, I did things that made me lose my self-worth and lose my self-respect. In all honesty, I don't ever remember having any self-worth or self-respect to lose until after I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. The only feelings I ever remember having for myself was self-hatred. I never liked the way that I looked. I never liked where I was living. I never liked what was going on in my life. And most of all, I never for one instant liked the way that I was feeling. And that's why, for me, alcohol and chemicals were so important. They gave me just some kind of a relief from that kind of pain and those kind of feelings that were just constantly going on inside of me. When I was looking around and deciding what I wanted to be like, I grew up in an alcoholic home. I know today a lot of the people I was watching and making these opinions about what life was really like were alcoholics. My mother is sober today. A lot of times I leave her out there drinking, and so I want to say that. But at that time she was drinking, and so I knew a lot about alcoholism. I knew what this disease was all about, I guess, although I certainly didn't know that it was a disease, and I knew I wanted to know part of it. You know, I knew that was not going to be a part of my life. I knew that my mother was weak, and she was one of the people that I hated for those weaknesses. Anyway, when I was looking around at the different kinds of people and what was going on in life, I decided that what I wanted to be was a boy. And when I told my family this, they began to take me to the psychiatrists and psychologists and to priests, and they were very concerned about this. And somewhere along the line, I guess I came up with some form of acceptance where I realized I wasn't going to be able to be a boy. It wasn't as easy to do back then as it is today. And I had to somehow accept that. And so for me, the only alternative as I saw the world was to be a tough broad. And that's what I spent all my time doing before coming into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, was trying to be what I thought a tough broad was. And I grew up in a little town called Venice. It's a beach town. And in Venice, if you were going to be a tough broad, at least the way I saw the world, you didn't wear shoes because it was a beach town. You had to be barefoot and have tough feet. And you joined a gang, which I did. And you did a lot of fighting, which I did. I've never won a fight in my life. However, I never fought less than 5 people at a time. And my sponsor, after I'd been in Alcoholics Anonymous, explained to me that the reason that I always set up fights where I would fight groups of from 5 to 15 was because that way if you lose, nobody can really say anything about your ability as a fighter, because nobody could expect you to beat that many people up. But if you fight one person and you lose, people can say things about what kind of a fighter you were. And so I was one of those people that was willing to walk around with my face bashed in a lot on the off chance that somebody might think that I was tough. And that has a lot to do with sort of the way I got by out there. I used to stand down at the beach looking tough with my gang, and sometimes touristy-looking people would walk by, and I would look them right in the eye, and I would take my cigarette, and I would throw it down on the sidewalk, and I would put it out with my tough bare feet. And these people would sort of poke one another and whisper back and forth, and I knew what they were saying. They were saying, "Wow, that is one tough broad." And I was very impressed that I could do that, and I knew that they must be just as impressed as I was, you know. And it wasn't until after I came into the program that my sponsor convinced me that perhaps what some of those people were saying was, "Did you see that? That person just put flesh to fire. Why would anybody do anything so stupid?" But I thought it was a very tough thing to do, you know, and I did it all the time. And, of course, just being able to step on lit cigarette butts did not really mean you were tough. You were only truly tough if you were then able to walk upon those feet as if it did not hurt. And that's what I was busy doing before coming into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I began stealing before I began drinking, and it was one of the few things that I ever thought that I was good at. I had absolutely no morals or ethics as far as stealing. I stole from anyone that let me in their home, and you know, and I always thought they were crazy to let me in their home, and I would just sort of act like I was a nice kid, you know, and they would let me in their home, and then I would just rob them blind and then deny it when they caught me, and I just never felt bad about that. I just thought I was really good at it, and I also thought, you know, anything I ever stole from anybody, I figured they'd stolen from somebody else, and so it just kind of kept things moving. And I heard a newcomer at a meeting in Ohio Street about maybe 2 years ago, and he got up and he said that he was real new. He was like 2 weeks sober, and he said that what was finally had got him to this program was that he found that like 3 weeks before he had begun spending his own money. And that made sense to me. I thought, yeah, you know, that is bad then. If you're anyway, I was brought to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous by my mother, and my mother had been in and out of this program for many years at that time with varying lengths of sobriety. She brought me to a meeting. She was just coming back, and the miracle of this program began for me that night, even though I didn't get sober. It began because there was a guy in that meeting that I admired more than anybody else in the whole world, and I didn't admire a whole lot of people, but I admired this guy, and I admired Paul because he was from Venice, because he had a motorcycle, because he had tattoos, because he'd been in prison, because he carried a knife and had it with him at the meeting that night, because he was one of the most violent and hostile men that I knew. And I looked at him and I thought, wow, I never thought people this great came to AA, you know? I thought it was just for weak people like my mother, and I was really impressed. I mean, if I had to tell you what I wanted in one sentence or less when I came to this program, I wanted the ability to walk into rooms full of strangers and have everyone there back away from me in terror. Now, when you're 87 pounds, that almost never happens, you know? But that was the way that I felt inside. That's what I wanted to achieve. And this guy, Paul, was a guy, I had seen him walk into bars in Venice and walk into parties where my mom was when I was there. And if he wanted to sit at that table, everybody just cleared the table and let him have it, because they never knew what he was going to do. He was that crazy. He was that wild. And I thought, this guy has achieved everything that I want out of life, and he is sitting in an AA meeting. I was really impressed. I got drunk the next night, and then I came back to some meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went to lots and lots of meetings in this 2-week period of time because I was following Paul around. He was going to lots and lots of meetings. He was just getting sober. And I never raised my hand because I didn't have a problem. And even if I'd had a problem, I would not have joined an organization that was allowing my mother to belong to it. So I went to all these meetings with Paul, and in between the meetings, I spent all my time explaining to Paul why I wasn't an alcoholic, why I couldn't possibly be an alcoholic. I was too young to be an alcoholic. I had my whole life ahead of me. I wasn't anything like my mother, who really was an alcoholic, and I just couldn't possibly be alcoholic. And Finally, Paul turned to me and he said, you know, June, I'm pretty new around here, and they've told me I can't diagnose anybody's disease but my own. He said, but in your case, I'm going to make an exception. I've seen the way that you drink, and I've seen the way that you use chemicals, and I happen to believe if you don't come into this program and take what these people have to offer you within a period of 6 months or less, you're going to be out on the streets, you're going to be shooting stuff, and you're going to be selling your ass. And I knew he wasn't trying to scare me. He wasn't trying to make up some story like your teachers might do sometimes in school, you know, just to scare the kids. He was just talking about facts. He was talking about things that had happened in his life. He was talking about things that had happened and were beginning to happen in my life. And I thought a little bit about what he said, but I did not want to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not want to be an alcoholic. And during this 2-week period, as I was attending these meetings and talking and having these conversations with Paul, absolutely every alternative but Alcoholics Anonymous was removed from my life. I was living with my mother. I had just come back to live with her at that time. And by the time I got to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the only person that I hated more than my mother was myself. And because of the way that I felt about this woman when I was living with her, I just couldn't control the rage that I felt and the hatred. I blamed her for everything that had ever gone wrong in my life, and a lot had gone wrong. It's awfully convenient to have an alcoholic parent, but anyway, and I would just attack her physically. And because my mom was sober, she no longer felt so guilty that she had to be subjected to those attacks anymore, and she asked me to leave her home, and I did. The rest of my family had not talked to me in about 2 or 3 years. I was not allowed to call or come by under any circumstances, and I didn't bother to try. I had been in about 6 foster homes at that point. I'd been thrown out of all of them. I tried to get back in a couple of them, but none of them would take me back. I tried to get into some drug rehab and alcohol recovery homes that were available in the Los Angeles area at that time, and none of them would take me, some because of my age and some just because of my attitude. Tried to get into Synanon, which is a program down in my area, and they wouldn't take me. And that's pretty bad because Synanon took almost anyone, you know. And then I thought, well, you know what? Who needs those programs? You know, who needs this family stuff? None of that really matters. The only thing that matters if you're a tough broad is your gang. That's all that's important. And one day as I walked down an alley, all 5 members of my own gang beat me up. So I found myself sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 87 pounds. I had a black eye. I had a swollen lip. I had no shoes. Wouldn't have worn them at that time if I had them. I had what I was wearing on. I had no family. I had no friends. I had nobody to call. I had no money. I had no place to live. And started to raise my hand in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. You can see where it was kind of simple. It wasn't like, would you like to join AA or go to Hawaii? It was really easier than that. And I started to raise my hand. And when I did that, when I began to raise my hand, there were some people in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I know today did not know about the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that because when I began to raise my hand, some of these people came up to me after meetings and they told me I was too young to be an alcoholic. And they didn't want a little kid sitting in their meetings while they talked about serious things. And they told me if I came back to their meetings that they would get together and throw me out. And I didn't know that they couldn't do that. I didn't know that Alcoholics Anonymous had a third tradition that said the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. And that gives anyone that has that desire the right to remain in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I certainly didn't know that. I just figured AA didn't want me either. And that was fine with me because I didn't want me either. And I hadn't for a long, long time. And so I fell back on my number one answer. Went over to a friend of my mother's. I went into her bathroom, which is the first place I went at anyone's house I ever visited. I found the kind of pills that I needed, and I took an overdose to kill myself one more time. And before I passed out that day, I went to a noon meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And by the time I got to the meeting, I couldn't stand, and I couldn't sit, so I just laid down. And I don't know about where you guys go to meetings, but in West Los Angeles, where I got sober, they almost never called on anyone to share who was laying in the meeting. But for some reason that day they called on me. I really can't tell you what came out. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital and a doctor giving me medication to make me throw up and explaining to me that the pills I had taken were to slow down my heart. And had I been there 5 or 10 minutes later, I would have been in a coma that they probably couldn't have brought me out of. And I don't know why that was so different than any of the other overdoses that I'd inflicted upon myself over the years that I was out there. I just know that it was. I know that because since that time, one day at a time, I haven't taken anything that affects me from the neck up, and that's how I personally define sobriety. Done that one day at a time. If I continue to do that, the 13th of July this year, I'll celebrate 15 continuous years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to assure anyone who's new here that I never planned on staying 15 years. I never planned on living 15 years. It wouldn't have been on my list. I came back to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and fortunately for me, someone explained the traditions and that I had a right to be there. I found a sponsor that was quite hostile and a lot of people were afraid of, and he took me to meetings, and so a lot of people didn't try and throw me out of meetings. There were still people, that came up to me after meetings and they'd say, kid, I spilt more booze on my tie than you ever drank. And of course, I turned and explained to them that if they hadn't spilled so much, they probably would have gotten sober younger. There were people then and there are people now who will never be able to accept the fact that at 13 years old I was an alcoholic when I came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's just not really important. The important thing is that I came here, I had a desire to stop drinking, and I've stayed here one day at a time. It doesn't really matter who believes I am or doesn't. I'm very grateful for the people who were here in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous when I came here. And the longer I stay here, the more grateful I am to those people that were here, because so many of them tolerated me in a way that's far more than I can imagine myself tolerating some of the people that would come in. When I came to this program, I came here with a bad attitude, and I don't want you to think I got sober and got a bad attitude suddenly. I simply came here with the only attitude I had ever had, and it had always been bad. I did not like men. The only men I'd ever known in my life were alcoholics who beat up women, and they scared me. I wanted nothing to do with men here in Alcoholics Anonymous or anywhere else. Now, as far as the women were concerned, the only women I'd ever known in my life basically were alcoholics. I hated my mother. I hated me. I figured any other woman in here had to be like one of the two of us. I didn't want anything to do with them either. Now, when I got sober almost 15 years ago, all we had in AA were men and women. And I started out with a problem right away, When I got to this program, I had a very limited vocabulary. Consisted almost solely of profanity, exception of a few other words, the, and, mother. And there were a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous who were very offended by the use of that kind of language, and so I tried to use it more when they were around. I didn't wear shoes to meetings, or anywhere else, most of my first couple of years in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day when I got here, and I lit all of them myself. Occasionally someone would hold a match, and I allowed them to hold it as long as they liked, but they never lit my cigarette with it. After I'd been sober a short period of time, I took up smoking cigars and then later on a pipe. I continued to wear my motorcycle chains and my jacket that on the back said, "Do unto others," and then split. And I went to lots and lots of meetings. I went to 21 meetings a week most of my first 2 years in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was almost always on my way to a meeting or on my way from a meeting or thinking about the next meeting that I was going to. And I got very active in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous from the very beginning. And it wasn't because I wanted to get a gold star in AA. It was just because I was scared. I didn't have any place else to go. I think it's hysterical when I'm talking to somebody new and, we're talking about whether they're going to go to a meeting and, they mention the fact that they have to stay home Friday night and watch Dallas. I was like, great, next time you need a drink, call JR. That was not even an issue that I could not imagine calling someone in my early days of sobriety and saying I won't be at my home group, the Monday Night Venice group, because I'm going to be watching Monday Night Football. It was just not even an issue. I went to meetings no matter what, and it was not a multiple choice issue when I came to the program. Whether I would go tonight or not, it was just I went. I didn't have any place else to go, and that had a lot to do with it, I suppose. And it was real funny because I hear a lot of times people they say, well, I have a headache, so I don't think I'll go to the meeting tonight. I don't know, geez, I just I don't know. When I was about 5 months sober, I went to meetings for everything. If there was anything that I wanted to know, I went to an AA meeting. I wouldn't talk to anyone unless they were in AA, because I didn't think anybody knew anything but in AA. And I've been sober about 5 months, I guess, and I had these giant lumps behind my ears. They really hurt, and they seemed to be growing. So I went to my home group, and I asked them there, what is this? And they said, you have swollen glands. And I said, okay. And they kept growing and growing, and finally one of the members in my home group took me to a doctor. And the doctor said, you have the mumps. And I said, no, I don't. I have swollen glands. They told me at my home group that I had swollen glands. I wasn't going to believe some doctor, you know. He wasn't in AA, and he finally convinced me that I had the mumps. And he told me they were highly contagious, and I should notify people, you know, that I had been around. And so I went home, and I got out my phone book. I started calling the members of my home group, and I called the first guy, and I said, hello, this is June. I have the mumps, and you've been exposed. And he said, that's okay, kid. You can't keep it unless you give it away. And I didn't miss one meeting. I was out there at every one of them, you know. When in the early months of my sobriety, they used to make me the greeter at the Westwood meeting. And although physically I wasn't in as bad a shape as a lot of people that I've seen come into this program, since mentally I was in the running, you know, I had a lot of trouble having conversations, which is hard for anyone who knows me today to believe, but I really did. And I would be talking, and somebody might be trying to explain something to me, and I'd just say, bird, you know, and I meant it. I was like watching them for a while. And I heard music the first 6 or 9 months that I was sober, whether the radio was on or not. I never told anyone that, because I thought they would lock me up in a mental institution, you know, until I was, as I said, 6 or 9 months sober, and a woman got up and took a chip and talked about the fact that she'd heard music the first 6 or 9 months she was sober. And I thought, God, we were probably back there listening to the same station, you know. But they make me the greeter at this meeting, and I would stand there, and somebody would walk in and say, hi, I'm Kathy, and I'd say, hi, I'm June, and somebody would walk up and say, hi, I'm Cindy, and I'd say, hi, I'm Kathy, because after I heard more than 3 names, I couldn't remember which one was mine, you know. And I would stand there at the door, you know, barefoot with my motorcycle jacket, my chains, my cigar, welcoming the newcomers as they came into AA. In Westwood. They walk by, and sometimes I'd hear their sponsor whisper, you see, if you keep drinking, you can end up like that. When I came into the program, there was a big thing where everybody wanted to guess my age, and when I first came in, I still had my black eye and my swollen lip, and people were guessing me at 37. Anyway, I was told at the Monday night dentist group, they said the most important thing you got to do is get the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you don't have enough money to buy that book, we're going to give it to you for nothing down and nothing a week until you get on your feet. But if you're too afraid to talk to us, you can just go ahead and steal it. Now, I had been stealing, as I said earlier, longer than I'd been drinking. But I thought this through, and I thought perhaps if I stole a big book from an AA meeting, it would jinx my sobriety. And so instead what I did is I went to the library in Santa Monica, and I stole the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous there. And while I was there, I stole a copy of the 12 and 12 because I didn't see any reason to make 2 trips. I didn't have a car. It was a hardship, you know. And I didn't feel bad about that because I just thought the library has lots of books and I need these. You know, it was sort of the way I'd always felt about stealing. Anyway, I kept those books actually for a couple of years. And when I was a couple years sober, I decided that it was necessary for me to make amends for those books and about 50 others that I'd stolen over the years. Great classics like Misty the Seahorse, things you steal when you're 6 and 7. And I loaded these books up. I took them down to a local librarian in Culver City, and I explained to her that I was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, that it was necessary for my sobriety to return those books. I asked her, though, if I could make payments, because they wanted 3 to 5 cents a day, and I'd had some of the books for like 11 years. And she said that would be fine. She said it was sort of funny, though. She said some guy had come into a library when she was working there in Laguna Beach with the big book, and he had said the same thing I just said. He'd had the book for about 27 years, and they said, I guess you guys do this all the time. When I got to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I had a 7th grade education, and I dropped out of school, and I just went to lots and lots of meetings. And my sponsors thought that maybe I should go back to school, but I really just couldn't, and I didn't want to either. So there was a mixture there. And so instead, I just went to lots of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got the kind of job that you can get with a 7th grade education. And I went to work, and I had a great job for me. It was real flexible hours. I was allowed to get to lots and lots of meetings. I worked swing shifts and graveyard shifts and all kinds of different things. And after I'd been doing that for a while, I found someone on a program, and I was able to rent a room there, and it cost me about $40 a month or something. And and so I found a place to live. And when I had been sober a couple of years, I really didn't like this job anymore. I was sitting there one day thinking, which is still not a good idea, and I sat there and I sort of thought things through. I thought about the fact that I was going to have to work for the next 40 years of my life, one day at a time, and I was sure I'd be sitting there working and making the same salary. And it really upset me, and I called my sponsor and I said, I have to work for the next 40 years of my life, and I hate this job, and he said, well, why don't you just do it today, and we'll talk later. And not too long after that, I got a chance to go to a college and learn how to be a secretary. Now, if there's anything in my life I never wanted to be, it was a secretary. There are hardly any tough broads that grow up to be secretaries, and I was still far more interested in being a tough broad than anything else I had seen yet. So what I did, though, was I decided to take this chance, and I went to this school, and I started out typing about 17 words a minute with 9 errors, and I typed there one day at a time for 14 months. At the end of that time, I was typing 37 words a minute with 19 errors, and they told me that I wasn't going to be secretarial material. And I thought I could have told them that before we even started all this, but I did okay on some of the other office skills classes, and they told me that if I wanted to get a job, I probably ought to go out and try and get a high school diploma. So I went down and I signed up for a GED, and this test, they give you, it covers the 5 areas, I guess, that you'd learn about in high school if I'd ever gone. And I went in there and I did okay on the first 4 parts, and the 5th part they gave me was math. Now, at that time and up to and including today, I know how to add and subtract and multiply and divide if you give me a lot of time. And that's what I sort of thought they'd start this test with, and instead they began with algebra. And then they started doing things I couldn't even pronounce, let alone do. Like they had a rectangle, they had a line drawn across it to make 2 triangles, and the question was, how many feet are in one of those triangles? So I started to draw little pictures of feet in there. I have no more idea today than I did then how the hell you're supposed to figure that out. And all the test answers were A, B, C, or D. So I was at the bargain stage of my sobriety. I turned to my higher power and I said, okay, look, God, I'll tell you what we're going to do here. We're going to pick lots of A's on this AA. And I hope you know your math. And I think all of you should know that God's as bad at math as he is at typing. So we didn't pass that section of the test, but we did well enough on everything else. And now it was time to go out and look for a job. And that was one of the very hardest times that I ever had in my sobriety. When I talked about, coming into this program, and the only person I hated more than my mom was myself. I mean, those were things that took me a long, long time to deal with. And probably I'm still even dealing with a lot of the time today. But, it sometimes sounds like in Alcoholics Anonymous, people hate themselves and they lose all their self-respect and everything, and they're really miserable. And then they come into AA and they get sober and they really like themselves all of a sudden. That's how it always sounded to me when I would sit in these meetings. And that wasn't quite the way that it was for me. I got sober and I was the same person that I had always hated, never wanted to be. I looked like that person I always hated. I felt like that person I'd always hated and thought was weak. And I had to start to deal with these things. And I didn't want to, but it wasn't, I didn't stay in this program. And most of the time that I've stayed here, it hasn't been because I've been afraid of going out on those streets and dying. It's just because I've been afraid of going out there and living the way that I was living. That's what's kept me in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And even at that point, as bad as these feelings were that I had to deal with myself, it was better than going out there and living the way that I'd been living. But it had a lot to do with the way that I treated people in Alcoholics Anonymous. It had a lot to do with the language that I used and the way that I dressed, because I didn't want anybody getting near me. I didn't want anybody touching me. I didn't want anybody shaking my hand or putting their arm around me. And I did everything I possibly could to make sure that they didn't. And let me assure you, most people didn't. I wanted to keep people away because I couldn't stand who I was. Even after I came into the program and somebody, I guess, tried to explain to me, when you're supposed to take baths and showers and how often you brush your teeth, things like that. I didn't like to do those kind of things. And the idea of wearing makeup, I mean, there's different types of tough brides. There's makeup-wearing tough brides, and there are non-makeup-wearing tough brides. And I definitely was of the latter because I wouldn't have looked in a mirror for that long. There was just no possible way, that I would have done that. And so coming into this program, and I would have to take a shower, and it just made me want to throw up. I just felt awful, and I'd sit in these meetings, and I'd listen to people get up here, and they would share about the fact that they felt that way about themselves too. And then they came into this program, and things began to change, and now they could get out there, and they could walk on the sunny side of the street, and they could look anybody in the eye. And I'd sit there, and I'd think, that's never going to happen for me. But maybe, if I go to these meetings and I try this thing, maybe sometime when I look in the mirror, I won't feel nauseous. And that was the hope for me, that maybe I could just get to the point of not feeling nauseous about myself. And I believed that maybe that could happen here. That was hope that was given to me. I didn't believe that it could ever work for me the way it worked for these people ahead of me, but I thought maybe it could work a little for me. And anyway, I don't know. There were a lot of different situations. When I'd been 11 months sober, a bunch of my people from my home group decided to go to this convention in San Francisco, and it was the International Young People's Conference, and it was held at this place called the St. Francis Hotel. And I had grown up in Venice. I'd run away once. I'd made it 6 miles east to Culver City, and that was about as far as I'd ever been. And we never had a car and stuff. And so when we took off from Venice and went to San Francisco, that was the farthest I'd ever been. And of course, you have about 16 people in a car for 4 because nobody has any money, and that's how you're going to go to these conferences. And it was great. And we drove up there, and we pulled up at this hotel. And I don't know if any of you have ever been there. I have not been back, so I can only tell you the way I remember it at 11 months sober. Well, we pulled up at this hotel, and it was not like any hotel Mom and I used to live in when she was drinking. It was very different, and there were people there who were going to park the car for us. And I had never seen that, maybe on TV and stuff. And we got there, and everybody started piling out of the car. They were all excited. We're at the convention, and I looked in there, and inside there were these beautiful red carpets and these long red velvet drapes. And inside, I saw men wearing suits, and I saw women wearing long dresses, for Christ's sakes. It was daytime, And I looked at this place. I just couldn't believe it. And everybody started piling out of the car. We're at the convention. Let's go. I'm not going in there. They said, this is where the convention is. I'm not going in there. And I sat in the car. It took them a couple of hours to convince me to go in to that hotel. Because I knew that people like me did not belong in a place like that. That was a place for nice people. And I knew that I wasn't that kind of person. I knew that I was nothing but a dirty little Venice broad, that that's all I had ever been and that's all I was ever going to be. And I knew if I walked in there, they were going to come over and they were going to say to me, excuse me, this is a nice place. This is for nice people. You're from Venice, aren't you? You can't stay here, And I just didn't want to put myself through that, and I didn't want to put my friends through that. And finally, after I'd been there a couple of hours, they convinced me to go in. I went into the hotel. We went up to the room. It's the only convention of Alcoholics Anonymous I've ever been to. I didn't go to one meeting. I just hid in that room, terrified that someone would know I was in there, And that's sort of the way that I felt about myself, in those early years of sobriety. And when it came time for me to go out and look for a job, those are the feelings that I had. And I didn't know how to dress, and I didn't know how to talk to people, and I didn't know how to look for a job. I had never in my life known anyone closely that was a citizen-y kind of person, the ones that worked Monday through Friday in the daytime, And I just didn't know how to deal with that situation. And there were some women in the program, and they gave me some clothes, and they took me over, to take a second-hand store, and we bought me some things to wear that would be appropriate for an office job. And I put these clothes on. It was like Halloween, Look at the little Venice bride in the citizen costume. And it was very weird. And I went out there, and I interviewed, and it seemed like I interviewed more than anybody else in AA had ever interviewed, and I finally got a job. I was so excited. I got a job in an insurance company. I knew my sponsor would be so delighted because it was very square. And I worked real hard, and on the 7th day they called me in the office. I thought maybe they were going to give me a raise or something, and she fired me. She said, I'm sorry, you don't have enough experience, and not only that, you don't seem to have any common sense whatsoever. And I didn't even know what that was, but I knew I was being insulted, and I walked out of there. I walked across the street to a public phone. I called the Los Angeles Central Office. I said, this is June G. I'm a sober member. I've just been fired, and what are you going to do about that? And They just laughed, and sent someone over and picked me up, took me back over. I couldn't believe it. I had been sober a couple of years at that time. I had never heard anyone being fired sober. I mean, everybody gets fired before they come here. You don't get fired sober, and I didn't think we were going to allow things like that to go on here. I thought we would picket or something. And I remember I talked to my sponsor that night. I said, I never got fired before I came to this AA, and he reminded me I'd never had a job. And it's things like that that make sponsors so important. That had never occurred to me, I just never thought of that. I was just outraged at this situation that had occurred. Now I had to go out and look for another job. And somehow this woman on the program came by and told me that she'd heard that this bank was taking applications. And I thought that was hysterical. I'd never been in a bank in my life. I'd always been a thief. But she drove me down to this bank, and I filled out this application. I got to the part in the application where it says, due to the fact that as a bank employee it's necessary that you be bonded, we're going to do a thorough background check. And I thought, oh no, not me. I don't want anybody looking into my past. I mean, first of all, they call one library, and I've had it, I just didn't want to deal with that. And then I thought, well, I got to learn to do the footwork and leave the results up to a higher power. And so I went ahead and I filled out the application. I turned it in. I got called back on a couple interviews at the bank, and they hired me. And not only did they hire me, they put me to work in the vault. And I didn't even know if AA worked that good, I just couldn't believe that they would put me to work in a vault, with all that stuff. But I didn't feel anything the whole time I was there. I couldn't believe it. And somewhere during that time that I was going there, I decided that I wanted to take a class at night at the local college in Santa Monica, because I wanted to be able to drive, and I wasn't able to get a driver's license unless I had that class. And so I went to school there, and while I was there, I thought maybe I'd take an English class. I had been able to read before coming into the program, but in the early years of my sobriety, I had a real difficult time reading anything. I just couldn't keep all those words in one sentence, all together. It just, my mind didn't work like that very well anymore. And so I thought maybe I should try and learning to read again. And I did that, and I worked full-time, and I took these classes, and then later on I took a couple of other classes. Later on I got offered a job on campus, which would allow me to work full-time on campus and still go to school and go to school a little bit more, and I decided to do that. And I just sort of went to school one day at a time. And at the end of a couple of years, they called me in the office and told me that I'd completed the requirements for what they called an AA college degree. And I thought that was a pretty funny name for a college degree. I had never wanted a college degree. I never even wanted to go back to school, but it was something that I was really amazed that had happened in my life. I had, in my life before coming to the program, and even in the early years of sobriety, with these jobs and stuff, I had never gone anywhere Monday through Friday for the required period of time. I had never done that. As a kid, my mom was usually drinking, and so I kind of had control over how long I stayed or didn't stay, and I just never made it 5 days in a week. I just couldn't do that, And here I had finished the school, and I hadn't missed a class. And it was the first thing in my life where I saw myself working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous in something outside of staying sober. The way that I was in the early years of my sobriety, and even sometimes still am today, is that I was raised that I had to, if I said I'd do something in Alcoholics Anonymous, I had to be there, and I had to show up, and I had to be on time, and I had to look as good as I could, and I would do that for AA, but AA only, and the rest of the time I would look like hell. I'd be late, and I wouldn't show up, and that's sort of how I was with my jobs and with my friendships and with everything else. But with AA, I never did that. I was just very rigid about it. And somewhere along the line, that sort of being responsible and being dependable kind of just overlapped into my life without my even wanting it to. And here I was finding out I'd gone to school for 3 years and I hadn't missed a class. I just couldn't believe it. It wasn't anything that I ever wanted. And I found that I'd been working and I had not ever taken a day off in a year. I didn't work full time at that point in time, but I had not, called in sick or played hooky or anything else. And it was something that made me feel good about myself. I found that, that in these different areas, I was responsible and I was dependable, and that wasn't anything I ever wanted. Believe me, when I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous wanting to be a tough bride, I would not have written, I'd like to be responsible and dependable. It just wouldn't have, I didn't even know what those words meant. Anyway, I went ahead and I graduated from that city college, and I went ahead and decided to go on with school, and I did that one day at a time, and I finished school a couple of years later. And somewhere along the line, I'd come up with a dream that I'd had, and I don't honestly know when I had the dream or how long I had it, or if I had it before I came to AA and had forgotten it. I really don't know, but I did the footwork for that dream, and that's sort of how I was taught in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I turned in all these letters and applications, and I got a telegram just about 7 or 8 years ago now telling me that I'd been accepted as one of 300 out of 3,000 applicants to go to law school. Now, when I walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, I had always planned on spending a lot of time in court, but never on that side of the table. And that's what I've been doing over the last several years is working on that. And I just couldn't believe that I could get in there. And Jerry and Kathleen and I were talking about it this morning. And I couldn't have, were it not for Alcoholics Anonymous and what had happened in my life here. I mean, there are days out there where I start to think, you really must be fairly bright. I mean, you must be fairly bright. And after all, you were awfully young when you came into AA. And you may have been going through a phase. It was probably just sowing your oats. Maybe you had some bad grass or something, and you probably really aren't an alcoholic. And so what I do is at those times is I take out the big book and I read the chapter 3, more about alcoholism. And I read the part in the very beginning where it says that, the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is that someday he can control and enjoy his drinking. And fortunately for me, I've always been able to look at that sentence and know right away that that's absolutely impossible. Throughout the years of my sobriety, I can tell you honestly, I have never wished that I could taste a martini. I have occasionally thought of downing large bottles of everything, but I've never thought of, sipping a cocktail or something. I mean, I either want to get blitzed or I don't even want to bother, So there's never been any issue for me about wanting to be out there and controlling it, And so I have no doubt that, that I'm an alcoholic and that Alcoholics Anonymous is what's made everything that's going on in my life today possible. It's made me what I am. It's made me the things that I haven't even wanted to be sometimes. I've learned how to dress here. I've learned how to talk to people out there, and I've learned how to work. I've learned how to go to school. And I've just sort of learned to get out there and live life as a human being. And it's been an interesting experience. I was thinking this morning, too, there's been a lot of times where there's been a lot of situations where I wished I would have been able to drink through them. Sometimes I think you guys had it easier, going out on those first dates, at 17 and I remember going to a party that this guy asked me out to when I was at UCLA, and we went to this hotel and we got to this party, and he had told me that it was very formal. And so a woman in the program, I called up, I go, what do you wear when it's very formal? And they said, you have to wear a long dress. And so come over and borrow one. So I come over, I get a dress, and I put this long dress on, and we go to this party. And at the hotel, he gives me this corsage, and I go in the bathroom and I try and put it on. I can't figure it out, I've never had one, and I can't figure it out. So, if you can't do it, you ask somebody for help. So there's this woman in the bathroom, and I said, excuse me, could you please help me with this corsage? I can't find the pin. And she says, you can't find the pin? Why, you silly goose, this is a wrist corsage. There is no pin. I'm like, oh, okay. And so she said, well, haven't you ever had a corsage before? I'm like, well, no. She said, well, didn't you go to the prom? I was like, look, I didn't go to high school, all right? Just give me the corsage back. But I don't want to tell you my whole story, So anyway, I get the corsage on, and she's wearing a dress that just comes to her knees. And as I'm about to walk out of the bathroom, she goes, don't worry about your dress. So, of course, I was the only person there with a long dress. Everybody else had dress to their knees. And I sat there and I just thought, people in AA, they could drink through this. If I had enough to drink, I'd think, why are they all wearing those stupid dresses? I'm the only one dressed right, But I wasn't able to do that. Anyway, when being in law school was real hard in a lot of different ways, and it was very interesting. When I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I did not have a sense of humor. I didn't think anything was funny. I didn't think anything that had ever happened in my life had ever been funny. And so I didn't laugh a lot, and I didn't really appreciate other people laughing a lot, particularly at my life, because I just didn't see the humor in it. And probably one of the greatest gifts that I've been given in this program is a sense of humor and the ability to laugh at myself and at the things that have gone on in my life. And I guess in some ways my sense of humor is a little bit warped. I learned in law school that everybody doesn't necessarily have the same sense of humor that I have. I remember I was talking to this guy in law school, and he was real straight. He'd grown up with a mother and a father, and I tried not to hold that against him, but and he was from behind the orange curtain down in Orange County, and he had short hair, and stuff, and his parents bought him a car when he was 16, the regular. And we were talking one day, and he said, he mentioned this movie called The Rose, which was the story of Janis Joplin, and I said, oh yeah, I've seen that. And he said, I've always idolized Janis Joplin. I mean, I didn't even think this guy would know who Janis Joplin was. And I said, really? He said, oh yeah. He said, I'm just crazy about her. I've always have been. And I go, wow, that's really interesting. And he said, of course, there was this one thing about this movie that really bothered me. I said, well, what was that? He said, well, there's this one part in the movie where Janis is about to have an affair with this man. And she turns to him and she says, I have a confession to make. When I was in high school, I slept with the entire high school football team. And this guy at law school says to me, he says, if that's true about Janis, I just don't think I could ever respect her again. And I looked at him and I said, you mean you'd hold one football team against a girl? And this guy didn't sit next to me for like 2 years. I mean, I went ahead and I finished law school and in 1983, and a lot of things happened in 1983. In early 1983, I found that my sponsor, Gail, was dying of cancer. And Gail had become my sponsor, even though she was a woman. And I think I should explain that a little bit. I really didn't like women, but when I was new in the program, it seemed as though, as I went to these 21 or 22 meetings a week, that a woman named Gail Wilson talked at about 18 of those meetings every single week. I could not get away from her. And so I thought to myself, perhaps if I ask this woman to be my sponsor, I can find out ahead of time where she's speaking, and then I won't have to go hear her all the time. And that's how I got a woman for a sponsor. So Gail became my sponsor, and I would go to meetings, and I would see Gail there, and I would go over and I would talk to her, and she would say, now look, don't sit next to me at the meeting tonight. I can't take the cigar smoke. I thought, well, that's fine, And then I'd be walking away, and she'd say, in June, please don't tell anyone that I am your sponsor. And that was fine with me, too, because I didn't want anybody to think that a tough broad like myself was hanging out with someone like Gail, because Gail was sort of in the lady variety. I mean, she not only didn't use the same language I used, she didn't know what most of the words I was using meant, and so Gail and I would meet secretly after meetings and talk about AA, And in 1983, Gail had cancer for a while, and I had known that she had, but she'd sort of told me that it was in remission because she hadn't wanted me to be worried and not do well in school. And so in 1983, though, it became very clear that she was going to pass away. And so I spent a lot of time in the hospital with her then, and we did a lot of talking. And, when I'd sit there in the hospital, these different doctors and nurses and all these people that would come in to care for her, Gail always introduced me to these people who, of course, had no interest whatsoever in meeting me, but she would say, I want you to meet Junie. She said, Junie's like a daughter to me, and she's going to be an attorney. And I would sit there and I'd think, this is the same woman who'd say, don't sit next to me at the meeting, and don't tell anyone that I am your sponsor. And now she wants to introduce me to absolute strangers, And Gail and I, we talked a lot while we sat there. We talked about AA and, what it had meant in both of our lives. And she told me some things that she'd never really said before. She said, Jude, she said, when you asked me to be your sponsor, she said, I really didn't want to. I know it's hard to believe, but she said, I said yes because that's the way I'd been taught in Alcoholics Anonymous. But, you were not baby of the year in 72. And she said, and when we would talk and, and you would ask me things, she'd say, I'd look at you and I'd say, this kid with her background and her attitude is going absolutely nowhere. And she said, I just really didn't think AA was going to be able to work for someone like you, you know. And she said, and then she said, I remember when you called me up and you said, Gail, I'm going to take a class at school. She said, I thought to myself, she'll never finish. She never finished anything. But she said, but I didn't say that to you. I just knew that you wouldn't do it. And she said, and then I remember you hadn't taken all that many classes. And you called me up and you said, Gail, I want to be a lawyer someday. And she said, I had to force myself not to laugh out loud, you know. She said, you never finished anything in your life, and I didn't think you could do it. But she said, you know, what we talked about was that Gail never believed in June. Never for one instant did Gail believe June could do anything. But she always believed in Alcoholics Anonymous. She'd been sober long enough to see incredible things happen here, and she just didn't feel that she had the right to say that you couldn't or you can't or it won't work, because it might. And that's why she never said anything, you know. And Gail passed away in April of 1983, and I graduated from law school in May of 1983. And then, just in case any of you don't know this, I didn't know it, in order to practice law, you then have to pass the bar in whatever state you're interested in practicing in. And for me, it was California. And I went ahead and I began to study for the bar exam. And I studied very, very hard. I worked on it every day. I did absolutely everything that was required. And I showed up, and I tried to do what was asked of me in AA and to stay close to my higher power, you know, and to do what was necessary. And I went ahead, I took the exam in July of 1983. In December of 1983, I got a telegram telling me that I did not pass. And I absolutely could not believe it. Could not believe it. You know, I mean, there was not one thing that I could think of that I could have done extra to have passed that exam. Not one thing. And I just thought, I couldn't believe it. You know, I thought I had let Gail down. I felt like I'd let everyone in AA down. I felt like it had all been a big joke, you know, that my higher power had somehow gotten me into law school, and it was just all a big joke, because it just wasn't going to happen, you know. I had borrowed many, many thousands of dollars. It was December 1st. I had enough money to pay my rent, and that was it. I was almost 11 years sober, and I couldn't have put $1 in a basket if I'd wanted to. I just didn't have $1, you know. And I just felt like such a failure. I thought, you know, what kind of an AA program is this? You know, you can't put $1 in a basket. You can't even buy yourself food. You've spent all this time. It's just been a whole waste, you know. You should have just stuck with being a waitress. At least you could do that, you know. And it was real hard for me. You know, I didn't want to talk to a lot of people, and the only thing that I did is I still kept going to meetings, you know. Throughout the years, throughout anything that's gone wrong in my life, the ups and the downs, I've always made it to the meetings, you know, and I think a lot of times that's what saved my life, you know, and I think a lot of people that end up drinking through those hard times because they get so far away from the meetings, you know, because I don't think it's any easier for any of us to get through those hard times than anybody else. I think that it's real important, though, that we stay close here while those things are going on. And anyway, I went to the meetings. I went out to, after my home group, you know, the Friday night meeting, the 5 and 10, I went out with two of my closest friends in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I explained to them that I had gotten that telegram that day and that I knew what it meant. It said you did not pass the bar exam, but it really meant you should go back and be a waitress. And they said, no, it doesn't. And I said, yes, it does. And it's, you know, when you're new and you try and talk to your sponsor, like you call up your sponsor and you say, okay, my rent is due tomorrow and I don't have any money. And they say, go to a meeting. And you say, all right, look, maybe I said that too fast. Let me explain something to you. My rent is due tomorrow. My manager of my building is not in AA, and I don't have the money. And they say, turn it over. And it's sort of like if you ask somebody, excuse me, what time is it? And they say, it's a horse. It's like you're not getting an answer, you know. And that's sort of how this conversation went this particular evening. I explained to them why I wasn't supposed to go on, and they explained to me that I was, that the telegram really meant you should take the exam again. And I didn't believe them. And I told them about all this money that I owed, and I couldn't get a job to pay the money back, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And they said, so borrow some more. So what the hell, all right. Can't pay it back anyway, so I did. I borrowed some more. I went ahead. I studied for the exam again. I gave it everything that I possibly could. I took the exam in February of 1984. In June of 1984, I received a telegram saying that I did pass. Now, I'd love to be able to stand up here and say that having received both telegrams, my spiritual program was just equally strong on either occasion. It's simply not true. I felt so much better about God and AA when I got that telegram that I passed. Anyway, when I got the telegram, it also said that in order for you to practice, you have to go to a swearing-in ceremony. It's really just another way of getting a couple $100 more out of you. But the telegram said that that swearing-in ceremony would be held on June 13th of that year. And that was Gail Wilson's AA birthday. She would have been 21 years sober on that day if she'd lived. And sometimes I think maybe that's why I didn't pass the first time. Who knows? But maybe that's why. Maybe so I could celebrate on that day that was so special to Gail. I got a job after that, and it's a job that I still have, and it's a job that I love a lot. And I feel very fortunate that I have a job that I feel that way about. In the early years of my sobriety, I used to hear Chuck C. talk a lot, and he would stand up and he would say, if you go to work Monday through Friday just to get your paycheck and so you can have the weekend off, you're cheating yourself and everyone who comes into your life. And I would sit in those meetings and I would think, what is he talking about? Could there be any reason in the whole world to go to work except for your paycheck? I mean, isn't it all about let's make a lot of money and more than anybody else and then we can be happy? I mean, I just couldn't understand that. And I don't know, I think maybe I was 10 years sober before that statement ever made any sense to me, but I'd had a lot of those kind of jobs where I went to work Monday through Friday for my paycheck, and I mean, I was miserable every hour and every second of those days, and the weekends just weren't enough to recover to get back there on Monday. And I feel very fortunate because I have a job today and I don't just go for my paycheck. I like the paycheck. I'd be pretty bummed if they didn't give it to me, but that's not why I go. And I feel like I'm able to be of service, and I feel so fortunate that I've been given the chance to have this job, because it's a real special job to me. And I'm going to tell you one more story, and then I'll sit down. About 3 or 4 months ago, I'm not going to tell you that story. 3 or 4 months ago, though, what had happened was I got called by my supervisors, and I got transferred downtown to our main office. And they brought me downtown to supervise some of the newer lawyers and to help train them. And that's what I've been doing for about the last 2 months. And it's a lot of fun. I really like it. And it's a nice assignment. It was nice that they thought of me. My boss called me in about a month ago now, and he just was talking to me about what I was doing and different assignments and stuff. And he said, by the way, I just wanted to tell you we're really glad, that you came down here and that you're doing this. And the main reason that we picked you to do this is because of your sense of humor and your attitude. You just have such a great attitude about your work and your job. And I thought, who would have ever believed? I mean, Angie, did you ever think June would get a job for her attitude? I mean, it's just not possible. And a lot of things that are just not possible have happened in my life in Alcoholics Anonymous. And they've happened in those people whose lives are very special to me. I mean, like Kathleen and Jerry. There's a lot of special things that are going on in their life right now. And they couldn't have happened were it not for Alcoholics Anonymous and what we've all found here together. Great boys. This is what I use in court. Anyway, my mother is sober today, and she celebrated 9 continuous years of sobriety in December of last year. And on Wednesday nights, a lot of times now I spend it with my mom. She's teaching me how to speak French. But a couple of years ago, I was following my mom somewhere, and on my way there, she got in front of me, and on her car she had this bumper sticker. It says, "My daughter is a winner." And I'll tell you, that wouldn't have been the same bumper sticker that Mom would have picked about 15 years ago. It would have said different things. If you're new in Alcoholics Anonymous, or you've been around here a while and you're in one of those dark hallways, please don't give up before the miracle happens in your life. I have no idea what your miracles were going to be, just as I've had no idea what mine were going to be or what they are going to be in the future. But I'll tell you, it's definitely worth waiting for. Everything in my life is not perfect today. There's things that I would change, but it's the best life I've ever had. And most of all, I like myself better than I ever thought that I possibly could. It's more than just not feeling nauseous when I look in the mirror. It's even better than that. Thanks for inviting me here this weekend.